All right. I'm just making myself available. I haven't done a live stream chit chat in at least a month. And hello. If you have any questions or comments, I'm just making myself available. I didn't think so. I'm just sitting here waiting to pounce on anybody if anybody checks in on me. And if anybody watches later on, I hope they're having a good summer. Um, for me, we are starting to get the extreme heat. It's not as bad in the northern Midwest, thankfully. Um, I'll just keep talking to myself. We had record rainfall, of course, flooding, and so my shiitake mushroom farm kind of got inaccessible because it was all emergency crews, volunteer emergency crews, and then federal funding called in, and of course, most people never talk about global warming, abrupt global warming. It just gets mentioned occasionally in the news. Um, but you figure half of the US population is still in denial because the corporate media has everybody focused on elections. And meanwhile, Mother Nature has other plans. And so the Arctic News blogspot has reported that the Arctic ice is at record low volume. Greetings. I'm trying another freeform chit chat. So whatever you want to talk about, just chime in the chat box. But I was just mentioning how the Arctic News blogspot has a brand new Arctic News. Hello. Feel free to ask any questions or comments in the chat box. And so I just put a link for this new Arctic News article. Um, they're reporting record low volume in the Arctic for the Arctic ice. Is it record low volume? And the global temperature is, not surprisingly, I think it's the 13th month in a row of record global average temperature. And their point being that we are out of El Nino, but we're still having record temperature. And since the extent of the Arctic ice is pretty much the same, but since the volume is at record low, that means the extent is very, very thin. Greetings. Anybody have any questions or comments? um, I'm just chilling out in the summertime here. Fortunately, it's not too hot where we're at, but it's really humid, so it definitely makes you sweat a lot if you're working outdoors. So really, okay, I'll check that out. Well, all right. You saw it when it was blue, huh? Now people see it as red. So that's okay. Ah, well, so Do you think Joseph Fourier was wrong 200 years ago when he's like, he realized the sun was heating Earth, not not the internal heat, because when they 200 years ago they dug down, they had enough minds where they're like, it's not, we're not getting heat from the Earth, we're getting heat from the sun. And then Fourier's like, well, if we're getting heat from the sun, it's going to radiate back out into the atmosphere. And he's like, okay, well, Joseph Fourier 200 years ago, he's like, the heat would radiate back out into the atmosphere unless there's, well, there was an experiment at the time where a guy had a box of glass on it, a dark box with a hole with glass, and that's heated up. It trapped. They figured out that that was trapping the heat, and so then Joseph Fourier, he wrote an article 200 years ago saying that there's obviously something in the atmosphere that's trapping the heat. Okay, all right. Well, all the like NASA and everybody, they says that the solar cycles, they do affect the temperature on Earth, but only like maybe like half a degree. And right now it's only like a tenth of a degree. But the natural carbon cycle is 12 gigatons per 200 years, as Raymond Pierre Humbert reports. If you check out Professor Raymond Pierre Humbert, he said, it's, I have that quote on my YouTube channel. He says that the natural CO2 emissions is 12 gigatons per 200 years, but humans, like 200 years ago, he says that the effects of human industry are are heating up Earth. He figured that out 200 years ago, and ever since 200 years ago, the evidence has just gotten stronger and stronger. Because then they figured out, well, it's CO2 that's heating up Earth, and they figured that out by like 1860, 1870, and then Arrhenius was the guy in 1890s who yeah, that's the natural cycle, but when you increase above the natural cycle, that's what heats up Earth. So like algae actually sequesters 50% of CO2 on Earth, but algae is only 10% of the biomass. So that proves that the CO2 sequestration is from photosynthesis. It's not due to the biomass. So the problem is everybody gets fixated on CO2 as a molecule, but they don't realize it's actually due to the photon radiation that the CO2 is resonating with. And what happens is as you increase the CO2, you increase the wavelength bandwidth of the photon radiation. And so you're able to trap a wider bandwidth. No, the oil is actually from algae. It's not from plants. There's a lot of propaganda from corporate media that has people brainwashed. Oil and coal are mainly from algae in the oceans. And the reason algae is so effective at photosynthesis is because it does not have it doesn't need to make any stems or roots. It's just like pure photosynthesis. That's what it does. So Sir David King, he's saying that if we spread volcanic ash, and he's mixing it with rice hulls in out of Goa, India, and they're working with small island nations, so they can do it without getting UN approval. And then what they can do is mimic the whale fertilization. And I did a whole talk on this on algae. If you just all you have to do is search algae environmental coffee house. I did a 2-hour talk about algae, and basically they're saying that only algae can save us because it's 50% of photosynthesis, but it's only 10%. It's only 1% of the biomass equivalent of life on Earth. So that just proves that it's like 100 times more effective at photosynthesis than plants are. So yeah, algae's way different than plants. That's why oil is actually from algae. And people don't think about algae because they don't think about ecology. We don't When people say ecosystem nowadays, they usually mean like the internet or cryptocurrency or banking or the health system. They'll say the ecosystem. Anyway, um, meanwhile, we're having um, like the equatorial rainforest is 50% of biodiversity on Earth, but it's being clear cut and burned down and then replaced with soybean monoculture by so that Cargill is the world's largest private corporation, and they're based out of Minnesota. And so we went and protested at their headquarters. My An activist friend of mine. All I knew was her name was Freedom, and she locked herself to a car and she blocked the entrance to Cargill. Well, the oceans they cover most of the planet, and then a lot of the places that are land now they were the ocean because of plate tectonics or just the ice ages. So anyway, um yeah, so there's just a huge amount of ignorance about global warming because people grow up in big cities and then we're inundated by corporate propaganda, and nobody ever does an in-depth study of global warming. And so they don't realize, like, there's 1,200 gigatons of methane that's pressurized in the world's largest ocean shelf. And so do you know what ESAS stands for? Because if you study global warming, you should know what ESAS stands for. But even the IPCC, they dismiss the ESAS. They say, well, that might happen in like a couple hundred years. But the scientists that study it, they're Russian scientists. So it's Shakova, Natalia Shakova, um, Shakova. She she uh she has a whole research group and she's friends with Jim Massa, and he's out of Alaska, and he's got a YouTube channel. And so she used to be at Alaska, but then she moved back to Russia. And but she's been corroborated by international, like a European science group. Actually, all the mitochondria in our body that powers our cells is algae. Mitochondria is from algae. It's symbiosis. So if you study the wife of Carl Sagan, what was her name? Lynn Margulis. Her whole focus was on how mitochondria in our bodies is algae. It's That's what it comes from. So that's the same way that chloroplasts joined in to plant cells to enable photosynthesis. You have you have algae in in animals as mitochondria. No, it is actually the same function. It's what it does is the algae, the mitochondria, it well, it doesn't it works on the redox oxygen cycle. So it creates it it feeds off oxygen, but then it's creates oxidative, what do you call it? So that's why you need antioxidants in the body. Well, it's similar in the fact that they both have pi resonance. So when you look at the quantum biology, the photosynthesis relies on pi resonance as one half spin. And so how there's this guy who did his master's thesis, Andrew A. Crokin, his in 1965. I did a video on his master's thesis, and he explains how um, the reason life exists as animals is that nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon, they have a low specific heat capacity. And it's the same way that photosynthesis works in with chloroplasts, is that you have a benzene like aromatic ring. So you have an aromatic ring of that that has an extra electron. So when you have that extra electron, it's just like how they make graphene now, but it's natural. And so that's what harvests the photosynthesis energy. But that's essentially what the mitochondria do from the microtubules. So the microtubules have that same pi resonance in the tryptophan in the inside the tubulins. So you have tryptophan as a benzene like aromatic ring. And so that's exactly how photosynthesis works. It's just that, so that's why when you do like Tai Chi or yoga, especially with your feet barefoot on the earth, then you essentially can do the same thing as photosynthesis. You don't need any kind of exterior materials. I mean, obviously, if you use psychedelics, that will increase the tryptophan activation. So you're basically increasing your serotonin levels because you're stopping the serotonin uptake, and so then you're activating the tryptophan more. Or you can even do that if you eat chocolate. Like I've been getting baking chocolate and baking cocoa, and it has high levels of tryptamine. So if you have like if you have like two dark chocolate candy bars, like with 70% dark chocolate, and they're usually like pretty bitter, but you can just get baking cocoa too. I get it from Equal Exchange. And if you have like maybe like four heaping tablespoons, then you'll get enough tryptamine to have basically like a natural activation of the pi resonance in the microtubules of your brain, and then that will activate like quantum resonance. So you'll have visions. You'll have like really vivid dreams, essentially. If and it's totally legal. You just have to understand the biology. But the point is like, well, algae's been around for 4.6 billion years. Yeah, it's chocolate. Chocolate's a really high source of tryptamine, but right. No, in the qigong they do fasting. Like ideally what you're doing, well you'd have to if you study my training manual, I go into that. It's Ideally, you want to, like the qigong masters, they're all vegetarian. They're vegetarian and they're pretty much vegan too. Actually, they only eat one meal a day because they're living off free energy like photosynthesis. Another thing you can do is solar gazing. If you do solar gazing in the morning and solar gazing in the evening when the sun's really low on the horizon, what I experience is I'll close my eyes after solar gazing and I'll see really beautiful blue light and then green around it. And it's not like like if you stare at a really bright light, you'll see the like reflection on the retina. It's not like that at all. It's in the third eye. And the third eye will create this really vivid blue light and green light. And that's how you actually absorb energy directly from the sun. No, I'm not saying go vegan. I'm just saying what the qigong masters do. Obviously, it's dangerous. Like when they did he went 28 days not only with no food but no sleep. No sleep for 28 days, just sitting in full lotus. So it's not just diet, it's meditation. So they call it energy feasting. If you look up Bigu, there's a Professor Rustum Roy. He's a materials science professor, or he was. He's not alive anymore, but he did a conference on Bigu because they tested these people. Some of them didn't have any food for a long time, but they maintained their nutrition levels because they just meditate all the time. But it's easier, you have to maintain like purity of your mind and everything. And of course, our whole culture is against that. And also solar gazing helps too. Yeah, I mean, I see for me, if I fast for a couple days, then I go into ketosis and I'll just my hormones, what they call the Jing energy, it's my body will convert to just burning off the fat. And that's really good for just pure Jing energy. But you have to combine it also with the meditation, which would be the Shen or the spirit. And then you can keep doing it. And that's what they call Bigu. So when he finished the 28 days of meditation, then he levitated up 9 feet when he was in full lotus meditation. And it's like a space-time vortex because when you're resonating with this basically like photosynthesis, but it's negentropy, negative entropy. So it's actually a time reverse precognition. And this is what Roger Penrose discusses in his most recent talks on the Science of Consciousness conference channel. So if you look up Science of Consciousness conference YouTube, so Roger Penrose, he says, well, this proto consciousness of the universe is actually precognitive. But his claim, he says, well, it's just like a fleeting, um, almost like a random thing. It's not random, but it seems like it's random because then like our left brain takes over and we have basically, like he says, the wave function collapses and then we have self-aware consciousness. So each moment of self-aware consciousness is actually the collapse of this precognitive proto-consciousness. But what Basil J. Hiley says is that you don't need that wave function to collapse at all. In fact, the wave function is the wrong mathematics. And so if you just use the non-commutative time and frequency, then there's no measurement problem in quantum physics. And you can, in terms of biology, you can maintain that resonance into the macro level. And that's what you do in meditation. And so you can have precognitive visions, but you can also create new matter. And that's what they call it in qigong, and they call it the golden key of superluminal yin matter. And that was a phrase developed by this qigong master Hong Hong Bao, and he apparently he got murdered. He got assassinated by the communists in the United States. Oh, okay. You're on that stuff. That explains everything. The wacky tobacco. Um, you know what? I don't know if you saw my I did a video on black pepper. It turns out that black pepper it inhibits the uptake of your endocannabinoids. And so if you have, is that what they call it? If you have tons of black pepper, like I literally had like 3 heaping tablespoons of pepper, and and of course my body got hot. It didn't. It did not. It's Yeah, I don't know about that stuff because I take tons of capsicum. I take tons of cayenne, but I'm just talking about my personal experience. So my body got super relaxed, and I wanted to just sleep. I felt like a wet towel, just like totally like a jellyfish, you know? But I also felt really blissed out, and I started to wonder, I'm like, "What's going on? There's something about this black pepper." And it turns out the active ingredient in black pepper is piperine. So if you look up piperine, it inhibits the uptake of endocannabinoids. And so it's a legal form of THC. Now, see the thing about cayenne, the capsicum neutralizes neutralizes uh the protein in it neutralizes casein. So casein is a carcinogenic protein in milk that's been proven by the China study where they study vegetarians in China because they don't really have any. Right, it is poison, but capsicum reverses it. Capsicum neutralizes it. See, the whole thing about Western colonialism, it started based on spices, and now Westerners are like, "Oh, don't have any spices." Like, for example, well, you can just look it up. Look up in a Google Scholar. I don't know if I've done blog posts on it. I probably did like a long time ago. No, it's capsicum. You spelled it right. Just go into Google Scholar and search capsicum and casein, and I'm sure you'll find stuff on it. And and what was I saying? Yeah, I get cayenne in bulk because um like if I for example, if you have coffee, coffee is really high in cortisol. It triggers your cortisol levels, so it makes you really stressed out. And Qigong master Robert Peng, he says he cannot drink coffee because it destroys his chi, and he's known as a zapper. So he's like the real deal. But the capsicum, it activates the vagus nerve, so that reverses the cortisol and it relaxes the body. I'm not telling you what to eat or not to eat. I mean, you could say that all food is some sort of toxin. I'd be willing to go that far. Like if you read the fourth, what is it? The fourth uncle on the mountain. I think it's called like something like fourth uncle from the mountain. He it's about this Taoist master who lives in a cave in Vietnam, and I think he eats like a little bit of other than that, he just sits in the cave and meditates. Yeah, go for it. Well, if you want to study our diet, go study the original human culture. Study the San Bushmen. I mean, humans have been around for 225,000 years. That's when the pygmies split from the San Bushmen 200,000 years ago. So, yeah, so I was just watching this Jerome Lewis, Professor Jerome Lewis. He's lived with the pygmies, which are really they're not really called pygmies, but that's what Westerners call them. But they're like Baka, Biaka, and they have like a dozen different tribal names, and they speak different languages, but they're actually the same culture. And they split from the Assam Bushmen 225,000 years ago, but they both have the same kind of spiritual training. And so, for example, in their traditional culture, they don't know what masturbation is. They don't practice masturbation. They don't know what homosexuality is. They do not know it exists. Yeah, I know. It's I have all the the evidence on it, but of course people don't know it because they don't do the research, like I even corresponded with Elizabeth Marshall Thomas, and she lived with an uncontacted San Bushman tribe in the 1950s. So I highly recommend her book, The Harmless People. Yeah, and her parents were anthropologists, and so she grew up with the in the San Bushmen in the 1950s, and then she wrote a follow-up book called The Old Way, and I contacted her. And anyway, so all the males, the in the San Bushmen, the males go off for a month without any contact with the females. Oh, I gotta go. I gotta go pick up my mom. Anyway, I'll talk to you all later. Thanks.